Shabbat Sholom, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you here on Friday night celebrating Shabbat together. We're going to begin our service this evening on page 10, Yedid Nefesh.
Yedid Nefesh, Avorach Haman, V'shochav dach Eretz Sonach, Yarutz Avdach Kemo Hayah, Yishtachaveh Mul Hadarach, Ki Yerav Lo Yedidutach, Minofet Suv V'kol Ta'am Yigalena Ufros Aviv Alai Et Sukkot Shelomach Ta'ir Eretz Migvodach Nagila V'nismechabach Mahir Ahum Kiva Moen V'choneni Ki Me'olam Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai 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 Yadadai Dai Dai Dai.
Lechu Niranana, page 11.
Lechu niranena, lechu niranena, lechu niranena, Adonai. Lechu niranena, lechu niranena, lechu niranena, Adonai. Naria, naria, letzuri shenu, mikad mafana betoda. Naria, naria, letzuri shenu, bizmiro naria lo, lechu niranena, lechu niranena, lechu niranena, Adonai. Lechu niranena, lechu niranena, lechu niranena, Adonai.
The bottom of page 12.
Arba'im shana kut bedor, va'omar am to'el levavhem, vehem lo yadu derachai, asher nishbati ve'api, im yavaun el menuchati. Shiru l'Adonai shir chadash, shiru l'Adonai kol haaretz, shiru l'Adonai baruch shemo, bazru meyom leyom yeshuato.
We continue together on page 14, Yismechu Hashamayim.
Yismechu Hashamayim.
Yismechu
Yismechu
Hashamayim.
Yismechu Hashamayim. V'tagel haaret. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. Yismechu Hashamayim. V'tagel haaretz. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, umelo. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, umelo. Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, Yismechu Hashamayim, V'tagel haaretz. Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, Yiram hayam, umelo. Yiram hayam, Yehiram hayam, Yehiram hayam, umelo.
Page 18, Zamru Ladonai.
Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor bekol zimra, bechatzotrot bekol shofar. Hari ulivnei Hamelech Adonai. Zamru Ladonai bechinor, bechinor bekol zimra, bechatzotrot bekol shofar. Hari ulivnei Hamelech Adonai. Yiram hayam lo, tevel veyoshveiva. Neharot imcha uchav yachar, harim yiraneinu. Lifnei Adonai kiva, lishpot haaretz, yishpot tevel betzedek, ve'aviv b'mei sharim. Yiram hayam lo, tevel ve'yoshveiva. Neharot imcha uchav yachar, harim yiraneinu.
We continue on page 20, Romemu.
Nai, 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 yai, dai, 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 yai, dai, 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 dai. Nai, 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 yai, dai, 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 yai, dai, 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 nai, 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 nai. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachravu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachravu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachravu lehar kodsho. Romemu Adonai Eloheinu ve'ishtachravu lehar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu Romemu.
I ask that if you're able to do so, please rise. We continue on page 21, Mizmor LeDavid.
Mizmor LeDavid, Havul Adonai b'nelim, Havul Adonai, Kavod va'os, ay, 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 Havul Adonai, Kevod shemo ishtachavu l'Adonai, Yad Kodesh, Kol Adonai, Hamayim el hakavod hirim, Adonai, Hamayim rabim, Kol Adonai, Bakoach, ay, 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 Kol Adonai, Behadar, Kol Adonai, שובר ארזים וישבר אדוני את ארזי הבנון ויקידם כמו עגל לבנון וציון כמו בן רמים כמו בן רמים איי 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 כל אדוני כותב אבות אש כל אדוני יקיל מדבר יקיל אדוני מדבר קדש כל אדוני כל העיינות ויקסוף יערות כמו בן רבים כמו מרכבות איי 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 אדון עלמה בו ישב וישב אדוני מלך לעולם אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום nay 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 ay 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 nay 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 nay
Please be seated. Anna Bakoak is on page 22. Adonai, if you would, may your mighty right hand undo the knot that ties us up. Accept the prayers of your people, you who are revered. Raise us up and cleanse us.
Ana bechoach, bechoach, gedulat yemincha, yemincha. Tatit serura, kaberinat tamcha, sagvenu, tzarenu nora. Ana bechoach, bechoach, gedulat yemincha, yemincha. Tatit serura, kaperinat tamcha, sagvenu, tarenu nora. Ana bekoach, gedulat yemincha, tatit serura, kaperinat tamecha, rinat tamecha. Sagvenu tarenu nora Nagibor dorshe yechudcha Kivavad shomrem Barchem tarem Rachamem sitkatecha Tamid kolem Ana bekoach gedulat yemincha Tatit serura Kaberinat tamecha Rinat tamecha Sagvenu tarenu nora Nai 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 nai.
We continue on page 23 as we prepare to greet the Shabbos bride, Lecha Dodi.
Nai 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 Nai, 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 nai. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'zachor, b'dibur echad ishmi'anu, El ha'michad Adonai echad, U'shemo echad l'shemo tiferet. Ve'nitila lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Ligrat Shabbat lechu v'nilcha ki hi mekor, Hamerach merosh mikedem, Nesucha sof ma'aseh B'machshava tchila. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Mikdash melech ger melucha kumetzei, Mitoch ha'fekarav l'kshevet, Ve'mekabeka ve'hui yachamol alaykem la. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Hina'ari me'afar kumi, Livshi bigdei tifartecha mi al yad ben Yishai, Bet halach mirkarva el nafshi, Nafshi gehala. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Hitoreri giva orech, Kumi ori uri, Shir daberi kivod Adonai, Alahik nikva. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lo tevoshia, v'lo tikami, ma tishtochachia, u'matechemi bak yechesu, ami v'nivneta, irati la. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. V'hayu l'shimsa, shosaik v'rachaku kol, Mevalaik yasis alaik, Elochaik kim schos chatan, Chatan akala. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Yaminu smol tifrotzi ve'et Adonai, Ta'aritzi al yarish, Ben apartzi v'nismecha, V'nagila. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Boi v'shalom ateret bala gam besimcha, U'betzolato chemune, Am segula boi chala.
Shabbat Malkata.
Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha dodi eligrakala, Penei Shabbat nekabela.
Please be seated. We continue together on page 27, Mizmor Shir Le'yom HaShabbat.
Mizmor shir, Mizmor shir, Mizmor shir le'yom HaShabbat. Mizmor shir, Mizmor shir, Mizmor shir le'yom HaShabbat. Tov tov lehodor l'Adonai, Tov tov lehodor l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Tov tov lehodor l'Adonai, Tov tov lehodor l'Adonai, Tov tov lehodor l'Adonai, ulezamer l'shimcha elyon. Tov tov lehodor l'Adonai, חסדך להגיד בבוקר חסדך באמונתך בלילות באמונתך בלילות טוב טוב להודות לאדוני לחגי בבוקר חסדך לחגי בבוקר חסדך באמונתך בלילות באמונתך בלילות טוב טוב להודות לאדוני טוב טוב להודות לאדוני טוב טוב להודות לאדוני ולזמר לשמך עליון טוב טוב להודות לאדוני.
We declare God as sovereign of the universe. Adonai Malach, page 29.
Adonai Malakeu Lavesh Lavesh Adonai Ozid Azar Aftikon Tevel Baltimot Aftikon Tevel Baltimot Nachon Kisaka Meaz Me'olam Naseu neharot Adonai, Naseu neharot kolam, Yiseu neharot toyam, Mikolot mayim rabim, Adirim mishbereyam, Adir bamarom Adonai, Adir bamarom Adonai, Erotecha nemnu meod, Leveitcha na'ava kodesh, Adonai leorech yamim, Adonai leorech yamim, Mikolot mayim rabim, Adirim mishbereyam, Adir bamarom Adonai, Adir bamarom Adonai.
Please rise. We turn to page 39 as we heed the call to worship together, the Baruch Hu. Please rise.
Nai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai ya da dai 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 ya da dai na ya da dai nai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai ya da dai 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 ya da dai na ya da dai Baruch hu et Adonai hamevorach Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed Yadai Nai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai Yadai nai 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 Yadai na Yadai nai nai na 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 nai 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 na 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 nai nai Yadai nai 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 Yadai na na nai Uma'avir yom umevi laila U'avdil bein yom uvein laila Adonai tzevaot shemo Adonai tzevaot shemo El chai v'kayam tamid yimloch Aleinu le'olam va'ed Baruch atah Adonai Amariv Aravi.
Ahavat Olam, page 40.
Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Avta Torah u'mitzvot u'kimu mishpatim Otanu limadeta Al kein Adonai Eloheinu B'shokbeinu v'kumeinu Nasiach bechukecha V'nismak b'divrei Toratecha U'b'mitzvotecha Le'olam va'ed Ki kem kayenu ve'orech yameinu Ve'orech yameinu Uvahem nege yomam v'layla Be'avatecha Al tasir mimenu le'olamim Baruch ata Adonai Ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levacha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha Ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele Asher anochi mitzavecha Hayom al levavecha V'shinantam levanecha V'dibarta bam V'shivtecha b'veitecha U'melektecha b'derech U'v'shokbecha u'v'kumecha U'kshartam leot al yedecha Ve'hayu letotafot bein einecha U'ktavtam al mezuzot
Beitecha
V'hisharecha Hayim shemot
Page 42. Ani Adonai Elohechem Asher Chotzeti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim Lihiyot Lechem LeElohim Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Adonai Elohechem emet.
We continue on page 44. Who is like you, Adonai, mi chamocha?
Nai 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 Mi kamocha ba'elim Adonai Mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh Norat tehilot, oh seifele Norat tehilot, oh seifele Malchutecha ra'u vanecha Mokei al yam livnei Moshe Ze'eli anu ve'amru Ze'eli anu ve'amru Adonai yimloch Le'olam va'ed Adonai yimloch Le'olam va'ed Nai 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 nai.
Hashkivenu, page 45.
Ashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Ashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Ushmor tzeitenu uvoenu lechaim u'shalom me'ata ve'ad olam. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Ashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom ve'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim.
Adonai, shelter us in the shadow of your wings, for you are our God. Please watch over us and deliver us. And you, God, are sovereign, merciful, and compassionate. Ensure our going and coming for life and peace now and forever. May you spread over us your canopy of peace. Baruch atah Adonai, who spreads the canopy of peace over us, over all the people Israel, and over Jerusalem.
Ashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim. Ashkivenu Adonai, Eloheinu leshalom, ve'hamidenu malkeinu lechaim.
Please rise as we sanctify Shabbat together. Vishamru is on page 46.
Vishamru v'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, לעשות את השבת לדורות המרית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות המרית עולם. ביני ובין בני ישראל אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם, אותי לעולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות המרית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני, עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות המרית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות המרית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורות המרית עולם.
Hatzi Kaddish, page 46.
יתגדל ויתקדש שם רבה, בעלמא דברה חירותי וימליך מלכותי, בחייכון וביומכון ובחיי כל בית ישראל. בגלה בגלה ובזמן קריב אמרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם עולם בעלמיה.
יתברך
יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר וירומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקדושה ברכו לילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו Amen.
The Friday night Amidah begins on page 47. This is a silent prayer. Use the words of the Siddur to guide you or the private meditations of your own heart. For those of you still praying your Amidah, please continue to do so. The rest of us may be seated. Shalom Rav is on page 51.
Shalom Rav, Am Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav, Am Yisrael Amcha, Tasim Leolam. Ki Hatahu Melech Adon Lechol HaShalom Ki Hatahu Melech Adon Lechol HaShalom Shalom Rav Al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam Shalom Rav Al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam V'tov Beinecha Levarech Et Amcha Yisrael Bechol Heit ובכל שעה בשלומך. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם. תשים לעולם.
We make peace together. Ose Shalom, page 52.
Ose Shalom bimromav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose Shalom bimromav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose Shalom bimromav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose Shalom bimromav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose Shalom bimromav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen. Ose Shalom bimromav hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen.
Kaddish Shalem, page 54.
יתקרא וגרשם מרבה,
אמן.
ועמד דברה כרותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובמכון ובחי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו, אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך, לעלם ולעל מעל מאי. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ומינשא ויתהדר וינעלה ויתהלל שמי לקדושה, בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה דאמירן מעלמה ואמרו, אמן. תתקבל צלות תהון ובאותהון לכל ישראל, כל דבו בנו משמיה ואמרו, אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו, אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו hu yaseh Shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imeru amen.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Growing up in the 90s gave me access to a lot of great entertainment. We had what they now call the Disney Renaissance. And with films like Aladdin and Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, Toy Story, it's hard to argue against the fact that I was raised with probably some of the best children's programming the world had to offer. But with all of this great children's programming, it seems like the pendulum swung the other way and hard. Because the 90s also gave rise to a new type of cartoon that hadn't really been seen before. This is the offensive, gross-out cartoon, which I'm embarrassed to admit I also watched as a kid, despite my parents' strong objections. You've probably all heard of Beavis and that other guy. Then there was Ren and Stimpy, then there was Family Guy. But the show that I couldn't get enough of as a kid and even up through college was South Park. Set in the fictitious Colorado town that bears its namesake, the show South Park focuses on 4 boys and all of their irreverent adventures. And perhaps my favorite character in the show, even back then, was Kyle Bravlovsky, a Jewish kid trying to fit in and coming to terms with his own identity when all of his friends celebrate Christmas and make fun of him for being very miserly. This character, Kyle Bravlovsky, was inspired by the co-creator of the show, Matt Stone, who also grew up Jewish in a mostly Christian town in Colorado. Now, usually Kyle's Jewishness in the show is mostly talked about as a cultural identity, but in one episode, he has a spiritual crisis. Eric Cartman, the boy who's usually responsible for teasing him, is awarded $1 million when his grandmother dies, and she leaves her entire inheritance to him. Kyle, on the other hand, suffers from a random crude disease, which afflicts him for no apparent reason. Suffice to say, he has to sit on a special pillow and go through painful treatments at the hospital. But finally, Kyle has had enough, and in one scene, he can be found at the local synagogue in South Park, denouncing God and his faith. After all, he says, what kind of God would plague a righteous Jew while rewarding a totally abhorrent person? So to make him feel better, his parents try to bring some of their tradition into the fold to help solve the situation. And they read him the story of Job from the Hebrew Bible. Now, as a side note, even though this is an adolescent cartoon show, they actually did a great job in summarizing the book of Job, which I'll do for you now. Here we go. It begins with Satan telling God that people only worship God because God blesses them with good things. God responds by saying that his servant Job would never curse him, even if bad things befell him. So Satan and God make a bet. And Job and his family are horribly afflicted. His cattle die, his house is torn down with his family in it, and he's punished with sores and lesions all over his body. By the way, this isn't just from the show, this is from the Hebrew Bible too. Things get so bad that Job wishes he was dead. But in the end, Kyle's parents tell him, Job refuses to curse God and says the very famous line, "The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away." Kyle is not very impressed with this story, and he still continues to denounce faith in God. To be honest, many people are not impressed with the story of Job, whether they're Jewish, Christian, from whatever background they come from. It's interesting, according to scholars, Bible scholars, the book of Job was probably, most certainly, the first book of the Bible ever written, even predating the Torah itself, meaning that it represents the very earliest iteration of Jewish thought processes about God. In this story, the book of Job, God is presented as a bully in the sky, an all-powerful deity that is capable of raining down misery and destruction, and he certainly does that. He does it to even those people who are totally not deserving of bad things. Here in this story, God pummels Job with terrible hardship just to prove a point to Satan. And as if that weren't enough, when Job cries out to God and asks him, "Why? God, why am I suffering like this?" God's answer is anything but consoling. God takes 3 whole chapters to answer this question, and he very precisely puts Job in his place. Do you move the sun and the moon? Did you create the world? He asks Job over and over. He tells Job that human beings are ignorant of the ways of the supernatural and incapable of understanding why God does what God does. By the way, this isn't the first time we get an anecdote like this in the Hebrew Bible. If you'll recall in last week's Parsha, Miriam is afflicted with a skin disease too. Now in our Torah portion for this week, Shlach Lecha, the Israelites have been ordered to send spies to scout out the promised land. When the scouts return and give their account of the intimidating new territory, the people, just like Job, announce that they wish they were dead. They cry out that they wish they had never even left Egypt in the first place. This makes God very, very angry. And after all, God had just performed numerous miracles in getting them out of Egypt. God asks Moses, quote, "How long will these people spurn me? How long will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs and wonders I have performed in their midst?" It's here that God decides to kill all of the Israelites where they stand and make a new nation out of Moses himself. But it's Moses, however, that talks God out of this. He tells God the following, quote, "You are the Lord, slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression." How does God respond? With the famous line that we repeat during the High Holy Days, "I will pardon as you have asked." It seems that the bully in the sky has a soft spot for Moses in this story, but I'm left to wonder, does God really operate like this? Does God really inflict suffering on the pious just to win a bet? Would God really vow to wipe out our people just because we complain too much? If that's the case, friends, we're in a lot of trouble. I think some verses from the prophet Yeshayahu, Isaiah, can answer these questions. This is from chapter 55. God speaks. God says, "Let the wicked give up their ways, the sinful person their plans, and let them turn back to the Lord, and he will pardon them. To our God, for God freely forgives. For my plans are not your plans, nor are my ways your ways." I think these verses can mean several things. If someone is truly repentant, then God will forgive them just like God did for the Israelites and just like God promises to do for us. But the line where God says, "My ways are not your ways," this means that we can never, ever understand God's rationale. Now, while this is incredibly frustrating, perhaps it's true. Maybe God was right to tell Job that God's reasoning was far too complicated for him to understand. God may be in control of everything that happens, but it's not up to us to understand why. Like I mentioned, this is not an easy pill to swallow, especially for human beings. We want to know the answer to every situation, to every question. We want to know the reason for every bad thing that befalls us. But maybe if we remain true to our faith like Job, we will be blessed tenfold in ways that we never thought were possible. Now, I told you at the beginning of the sermon that South Park was irreverent and very childish, so you should know that at the end of the episode in question, Kyle regains his faith in God when his enemy Cartman squanders his $1 million and is upset and miserable. Now, I know that we aren't cartoon characters, much less cartoon characters from a crude 90s comedy, but I hope that our faith is more durable than Kyle Brablovsky's. If we give up God when things are bad and only believe when things are good, we are certainly going to have a roller coaster of a spiritual life. It's not easy trying to understand God's ways or to even live with God's ways, but it's our responsibility as Jews to try and make sense of the oftentimes senseless. These biblical texts are the products of our ancestors struggling with the very same questions, the same ideas, and the same problems that afflict us today. We could ignore them, or perhaps we can try and learn from them, even when we disagree with them. In the end, I hope that we can understand that God's ways are not our ways, not in the Bible, not in Las Vegas, not even in South Park. Shabbat Shalom. Our tradition tells us that on Friday nights, angels from all over the heavens visit those who are celebrating Shabbat. I'll ask that if you're able to do so, please rise as we turn to page 73 as we greet the Shabbat angels. Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom Aleichem, Malchei Hasharet, Malchei Elyon, Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Boachem l'shalom, Malchei Hashalom, Malchei Elyon, Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Baruchuni l'shalom, Malchei Hashalom, Malchei Elyon. Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, Kadosh Baruch Hu. Tzeitchem l'shalom, Malchei Hashalom, Malchei Elyon. Mi Melech Malchei Hamlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
We remain standing. Kiddush is on page 76.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei puri hakafein. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'ratzavanu, v'shabbat kodsho be'ahava uvratzon hinkilanu, zikaron lema'aseh boreshit, ki hu yom techila lemikrahei kodesh, Zecher letziat Mitzrayim, Kivanu v'charta, Be'otanu kidashta, Mikol ha'amim, B'shabbat kodshecha, Be'ahava uvratzon, Hinchaltanu, Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat.
Amen. L'chaim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. We remain standing for Aleinu, which is on page 56.
Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon hakol, lateit gedula leotzer bereshit, shelo asanu goyei haratzot, velo samanu gemishpechot ha'adama, shelo samchalkenu kachem, vegor aleinu kechol hamonam, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שנותן שמיים ויוסד ארץ. אוקיי, נקבל לך אלוהים. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו echad.
Please be seated. Simple Beth Sholom is acknowledging the yortzites of Mayor Benedict, Abraham Berger, Malcolm Berman, Minnie Bliss, Nathan Bloomberg, Regina Bach, Joseph Brookman, Kathleen Chilton, Igal Kozainoff, Sam Cohen, Bernard Cohen, Stanley Drizzen, Henry Finder, Herbert Fisher, Robert Friedman, Richard Goldberg, Ruth Gottesman, Helen Grossman, Freda Gustin, Norma Hoffman, Sylvia Hoffman, Harry Howard, Toby Israel, Bruce Kretschmer, Ruben Lax, Philip Leibowitz, Sina Morton, Harry Robin, Anna Schallman, Esther Leah Sinkoff, Sylvia Smith, Francis Smith, Jacob Steritz, Helen Starr, Ramona Steinbach, Harold Wasserspring, Betty Waxman, Thelma Wexler, Victor Wiggins, Charles Zelenko, and we're acknowledging the Shloshim of Joan Pierce and Lee Rothman. Mourners and those observing a yortzeit have an opportunity to say the Mourner's Kaddish, which can be found on page 58.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah.
Amen.
Ve'almad divra kirutei ve'amlik malchutei. V'chayechon u'v'yamechon u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael. Ba'agala u'v'zman kariv ve'imru amen. Yehei shmei rabba mevarach le'alam u'lalmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yithadar v'yidaleh v'yithalal shemei d'kudesha b'richu. Ve'elah min kol berchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechamata da'amiran be'alma ve'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
Please be seated. We now have an opportunity to hear some announcements from one of our board members, Elliot Blut.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you to Rabbi Hodson and DJ for leading us in tonight's service. Please join us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for Shabbat morning service. Rabbi Hodson will be continuing Haftorah with Hodson. The class is held weekly on Tuesdays at noon, both in person and online. The Sandra and Stanley Mallon Early Childhood Center and the Levy and Bob Aram Kindergarten at TBS is currently taking registration for the 2022-2023 school year. Registration for the Judy and Ronald Mack School for Religious Studies will be opening soon. Following services tonight, please join us in the large social hall for Oneg. And if you know of a temple member who is in the hospital, ill at home, or in a nursing home, please contact the temple office to let us know. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you, Elliot. We're going to continue on page 211 with Adon Olam.
Adon Olam, Asher Malach, B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra, Le'nasa, V'hefso Kol, Azai Melech Shemo Nikra, V'acharei Gilot HaKol, Levado Himlok Nora, V'hu Haya, V'hu Hoveh, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא אחד ואין שני, להמשילו להכבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, מלוא העוז והמשרה. והוא אלי וחי גואלי, בצור חבלי בעת צרה. והוא ניסי ומנוס לי, מנקוסי ביום אקרא. בידו אבקיד רוחי, מעת אישן ואירה. ועם רוחי גביעתי, אדוני לי ולא אירא. נאי נאי נאי, נאי נאי נאי, נאי 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 נאי, נאי נאי נאי, נאי נאי נאי, נאי נאי נאי, נאי נאי נאי.
We end with the blessing, Yivarechecha.
Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'ir Adonai banav elecha v'chunecha. Yisa Adonai banav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. Yevarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha.
Adonai oz le'emo yitain, Adonai yivarek et amo v'shalom. Shabbat shalom, everyone.
Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam shalom. Salam aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam, salam shalom. Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam. Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu, Odivo shalom aleinu ve'al kulam.
Shabbat shalom.